Coming to you through the power of the internet, it is Fishing with Dom and my to-be weekly fishing-related podcast, Tackle Talk Tuesday. To start things off right, started off a little simple, something that I am passionate about, something that I have a lot of knowledge of and a lot of opinions of when it comes to fishing. And today we're going to talk about different kinds of fishing line. Now we're just going to talk about the three basics that there are. There are definitely more than three different types of line out there, but we're going to talk about the three average spools of line you are most likely to see on somebody's reel when you're out on the water, whether it be a monofilament, a fluorocarbon, or a super line. Now there are endless amounts of lines out there. For instance, when we're trolling the Great Lakes and we want to get our lines down a little bit more, we'll troll with something called lead core, or we'll troll with copper line. But today we're just going to stick with the basic three: the monofilaments, the fluorocarbons, and the braid. Braid is also known as a super line in this given situation. Pardon me. Alrighty, so let's get started here. We're going to take each topic one by one as far as different type of line, talk about it a little bit. Now let's get her started. Monofilaments. As far as fishing line, monofilaments have been around the longest when it comes to this modern era of fishing. If you find any generic rod and reel that comes with line spooled on it, whether you be at Walmart or at the Bass Pro Shop, there's a really good chance monofilament is on there. One benefit to monofilament to new anglers in the game of fishing: monofilament's very appealing because it's cheap and it gets the job done. If we look into the absolute definition of monofilament, mono means one and filament means one single strand. That goes to show that monofilament is one single piece of nylon, and the line stretches quite a bit. Now, the stretch can either help you or hinder you when it comes to fishing. In deeper water situations, when that water is really cold and say the bass or walleye are just kind of nipping at it and I need to really drive a good hook set into them, a monofilament wouldn't be a sound choice. But if I was throwing close action topwater and bass were blowing up on a popper or a walker style of bait, the shock allowed from a monofilament will help allow you to really drive those hooks into the fish so you don't rip them out if you have a super strong no stretch line. Another key point when it comes to monofilament: it's very abrasion resistant. You can fish monos around logs, rocks, through weeds, around docks, and it's still going to hold its strength because it's relatively thick for its size. A lot of catfish anglers especially, they will use thick monofilament leaders, and whatever line they're using as their main line, whether it be a super line or a mono, straight throughout, monofilament works very great when you're fishing around logs and rocks, because if it rubs up against something, you're not going to get a tremendous weak spot inside your line, thus reeling in a potential fish. As far as where monofilaments work: saltwater fishing, panfish, as I've said before. A lot of catfish guides in the south use monofilaments, and salmon anglers in the Great Lakes, guys who salmon and walleye troll, monofilament is always their go-to just because it's very affordable and it gets the job done. And sometimes that allowed stretch that the nylon property has, it helps secure the deal when it comes to reeling in a fish. It absolutely can make a difference. Now, when it comes to ultra finesse, it's very debatable if the fish can see monofilament enough to make a difference when in the water. I'm a big fluorocarbon fisherman, especially when it comes to bass and walleye. You very seldomly see me without fluorocarbon on, just because I like the idea that the fluorocarbon is absolutely invisible. But the monofilament is not invisible. The monofilament reflects light and can easily be seen in the water. Now, it's absolutely debatable if that can make a difference. On some days, pardon me, some guys say it does make a difference, but on other days, you know, you couldn't tell the difference if it hit you with a stick. And I'll be quite frank and quite honest with you. I used to fish with mono a lot when I was a kid, and I caught fish with it, but I like the properties of fluorocarbon a little bit more than I like the properties of monofilament, but I'll save that for the next topic. Now, the big thing that draws a lot of professional anglers back with monofilament is the stretch, as I've mentioned already. It's a love-hate relationship, but it can help or it can hinder your performance. But another big thing with monofilament fishing lines, it's not as sensitive as a fluorocarbon or a braid. So if you're fishing deep down, you're not going to feel bites as well as you would be fishing a different sort of line. But monofilaments are affordable. They're extra tough for their size. They come in all different shapes and sizes to fit any fishing situation out there. There are even ultraviolet colored lines available that you can see under black lights for night fishing. Overall, if you are new to fishing, monofilament is an excellent way just to start fishing. But once you really get into it, you might want to try different lines, because monofilament is good for a lot of things, but there are some things different lines will perform better. But overall, you can't go wrong with a spool of Berkley Trilene XL. That's the extra limp, extra long casting. The Trilene XT, it's extra tough. I fish with a lot of Stren power knots. Oh, that's another thing I forgot. Monofilament, all the knots with monos tie very, very easy. There isn't a knot you can't tie with a monofilament that you can't tie with anything else. So that's another benefit that makes mono appealing to an angler. If you know any knot, you're good to go, unlike different kinds of line. No wrong way to fish with a monofilament, but once you really get into it, a mono can be there. Tried and true. It's been tested for a very, very long time. It's been around this long, you know, for a reason, definitely. But Stren, Trilene, what are some other ones out there? Stren, Trilene. Oh, I'm drawing a blank right now as far as who makes Cajun Red Lightning, all sorts of different monofilaments out there. You pick up a spool, it's going to be relatively affordable, and it's going to get the job done in many situations. If you're looking for an all-around line, go with a monofilament. You should be pleased with what it is. Now, the second category of fishing line that I have available in front of me, in my hand, I have a spool of Trilene Fluorocarbon in front of me. Now, fluorocarbon is the bee's knees, in my opinion. Underwater, it is perfectly invisible. It refracts the light instead of reflecting it like a monofilament. And underwater, it cannot be seen by even me, and definitely not by fish. When I'm finesse fishing and bass or walleye are really, really pressured, and I want to get that extra little bit of comfort, a fluorocarbon pulls through and it makes sure that my bait offering looks as natural as possible. When it comes to properties of a fluorocarbon line, it sinks. So this isn't a very good stop and go top water line. Just because it sinks, if you're fishing a popper or a walk bait where you're getting a lot of stop and go action, because that line sinks, it's going to hinder the performance of your bait. It's going to slow down your draw for a hook set in case something comes and blows up your presentation. It's not that great in some situations, but you know, you can't win them all. You take some, you win some, you lose some. Absolutely, you can't get the best of both worlds when it comes to any different kind of fishing line out there. So as of now, fluorocarbon sinks, and it has little stretch. It has far less stretch compared to a monofilament, which makes fluorocarbon so much more sensitive. And if you're facing a cold front, and it doesn't matter the species, pike, walleye, bass, a fluorocarbon will drive a hook into a fish's mouth a lot better than a monofilament can, just because there's a little bit of stretch allowed in there. As far as same characteristics of a monofilament and a fluorocarbon, fluorocarbons are also very abrasion resistant. So I'm a big bass angler. I'll throw my fluorocarbons right up next to docks, right into logs, around rocks, and I'm not worried about a little bit of the line getting scuffed up. I river fish for trout and salmon with fluorocarbon just because it's built to last. It's very, very tough. It holds up, is what I'm trying to say. It's invisible under clear water. Spooked fish won't be able to be line shy. It can be expensive, but I will tell you this: you do get what you pay for. And we're taking to the internet right now. I am having several gentlemen on here tell me that their favorite fluorocarbon is Sunline Sniper and Sunline Assassin. Now, both are fantastic lines. I've fished with a little bit of Sunline in my day, but fluorocarbon can get really expensive really quick. This Berkeley Trilene 100% fluorocarbon averages about $20 a spool. Now, a lot of people who might be new to fishing or might not know a whole lot about the line differences, fluorocarbon, it works very, very well, especially when it comes to fishing with jigs and crankbaits. It sinks, it's very sensitive. All of the professional Bassmaster Elite Series anglers and professional walleye anglers across the country use fluorocarbon most of the time because of its properties. It works very well. It's very, very sensitive. But there are times where a monofilament would work better than a fluorocarbon, even though the mono is arguably visible in sunlight. But no matter who you are, fluorocarbon's a very good choice. I know professional walleye anglers, amateur bass anglers, muskie guides who use fluorocarbon as their leaders. You know, it works for them. It can hold up to toothy critters, especially when it comes to saltwater fishing. It all works very, very well. As far as fluorocarbon, I like it quite a bit. Seagar makes a really good fluorocarbon. Mr. Derek Gunn commented on my Twitter. Seagar Invisix is his second favorite choice, but he said his absolute first favorite fluorocarbon would be the Sunline Assassin and Sunline Sniper. And what can I say? I've fished with the Trilene, or not the, I fished with the Trilene fluorocarbon, yes. I've also fished with the Seagar Tatsu and the Seagar Red Label. There's a lot of different fluorocarbons out there. Stren makes an affordable fluorocarbon as well. It's called the Stren Fluorocast, and it averages about $11 a spool. And it works pretty good for what it is. It is a cheaper entry-level monofilament, but I will give it credit. It is pretty sensitive stuff. So if you haven't gotten yourself any fluorocarbon, do yourself a favor and pick some up. It is the bee's knees. I really enjoy it. And on to the next one. Let's talk about super lines, or as we can call them, braids. Braids, super lines, however you want to call them, are very, very unique, and they've definitely changed the world of fishing tremendously over the past 10 years. What a super line is a whole bunch of braided or woven fibers that are incredibly thin but very, very strong, woven to the diameter of a fishing line. Now, this makes very, very strong line for a very, very small diameter. What do I have right here in front of me? This is a spool of 20-pound Berkeley Fireline, and it is the size of a 6-pound monofilament. Now, this is the same size as a 6-pound mono, but it breaks at a 20-pound marker. And give or take a few, it probably even breaks higher than 20 pounds if everything is in working order. Braids are very unique. I've said this before. Braids work very, very well in situations that call for braid. Certain topwater tactics, frog fishing, flipping heavy cover, deep water jigging. If you're fishing for really big fish and you need a really strong line, a braid is a good option to go to. It's not as expensive as fluorocarbon on average, but you will have to pay for a good braid. I'm not going to argue with anybody about that. Braid, because of it being woven fiber, it doesn't stretch whatsoever. It's incredibly thin, it's really smooth, and it's very hard. I'm not going to say hard, I'm not going to say challenging. When you're tying a knot with a braid, you have to tie specific knots. Because it's so thin and because it's so smooth, if you don't tie specific knots, that line isn't going to catch itself on the knot. It's just going to be able to pull right out. Because it's so slick, it's incredibly smooth. When it comes to jigging, deep water, for instance, every spring on the Detroit River when the guys are jigging, the 1-ounce jig heads, the 60 foot of water and current, you need a braid to really drive home a monster hook set into some of those fish that are just barely nipping. Fluorocarbon, as I said, works very well in cold water because it's sensitive, but braid is the most sensitive of it all because it doesn't stretch whatsoever. You can drive the hook set home, but that stretch, that is a love-hate relationship. Sometimes, if you rip your rod tip hard enough on a hook set with a braid or superline, you're going to pull your presentation, you're going to rip that hook right out of the fish's mouth if you don't do it with love and care and affection and all that jazz. I'll tell you what, I've done it before. It's a skilled trade, but once you get the hammer down and don't set the hooks too hard, you'll definitely be in the business for what you want to be in and drive that hook right where it needs to go. Saltwater game, muskie, walleye, bass. Braid does a lot of great things because it's so thin, and thin for its size at least. You can go with a very small size line and fish smaller baits and be able to cast them farther. Berkley came out with a line several years ago, and it's still for sale in the United States. It's called Berkley Nanofill, and it's a super line. It's a whole bunch of microscopic filaments woven together. It's very smooth, it's very thin, and you can cast baits that are smaller than usual and cast them further than you normally think they would. Works very well, very sensitive. I fish with spider wire. Tough line makes a really, really good braid. Let's see what I have. The Tough Line Supercast by James on Twitter. He says the Tough Line Supercast is incredible performance with no stretch. It is awesome. Okay, yeah. Braids, they work very, very well. What do we have here? Sean, big fan of the Berkley Fireline series, as am I. I love Fireline. It works very, very well. We have Chris out here, and he's saying he enjoys fishing with the Suffix 832 braid. I have fished with the Suffix 832, and that's a solid super line. I've fished with that all over the country, and it really works well for me. Another big popular one from my friends personally is Power Pro. Now, I see a lot of guys use 100-pound Power Pro wherever they need it, or they'll use 10-pound Power Pro wherever they need it. All of the rods are fitted with Power Pro. It's a good super line. You got to know what knots to tie with it. Definitely a Palomar knot. You don't want a fisherman's knot or a Rapala knot or anything like that. You really, really drive the hooks home with a super line. Now, a lot of times when I'm jigging, I'll also use a fluorocarbon leader with a braid on it, just so in case a walleye or pike or muskie hammer my jig, the teeth of that fish aren't going to cut my line. Now, because a super line is so thin, it's not abrasion resistant at all. If you fish it around docks or logs and it gets a little scuff in it, it instantly becomes dramatically weaker. That's why a lot of guys, they'll tie leaders to it. When I am targeting catfish and I'm fishing with a braid, I've got a monofilament leader on there just because when my weight hits the bottom and my bait, whether it be live or dead or a piece of artificial chunk bait, that leader is going to be monofilament because that leader is going to be tumbling around in the logs, around the rocks, sometimes, you know, around slabs of concrete, depending on wherever the heck I am. You'll need to do that. But if you really know what you're doing and you're fishing with a braid could be an awesome way to either help you catch fish or help you hook into fish. But they might, you know, it might take you a little while to learn how to actually fish with braid. I know several guys, they won't pick up a rod and reel with a braid or any kind of super line, whether it be a nanofill or a straight spider wire stealth or fire line or trilene braid, just because they don't know how to fish with it and they don't like the idea of fishing with something with no stretch. Now, I used to salmon fish a lot in the rivers with just braid, but some days I'll fish with the braid, some days I'll fish with the mono, because that stretch really helps me in the current sometimes to battling fish, and when I'm reeling over rocks and fighting fish outside of logs. The braid is awesome, but the braid is very susceptible to damage. Whatever you decide to go out and buy as far as braid, spider wire, trilene, fire line, it's all very, very good stuff. You'll pay for it, not as much as the fluorocarbon, but you know, braids have their time and place. When you're flipping mats and hydrilla in southern Florida, or if you're deep water jigging, pardon me there, or targeting some of the biggest fish in the ocean, a braid is definitely something you want to go for. But those are the 3 main types of fishing lines out there. I definitely hope you learned something from the first of my hopefully many future podcasts. We went over the differences of monofilaments, fluorocarbons, and braids. I fish with all 3 of them very, very often. And if you have only fished with monofilament or you've only fished with braid, give it a shot. You know, there's no reason not to, you know, invest the extra couple of dollars and see how you like fishing with the fluorocarbon when the bass fishing is kind of tough. You might see a difference. I'd say in some situations it definitely makes a difference. And then when I'm in some situations, I say, I wish I had a mono right now because I need that stretch, or I wish I had some fluorocarbon right now because it's very abrasion resistant. But be ready is what I'm trying to say. Try different fishing lines, but most importantly, go outside, enjoy the great outdoors, try to catch a fish, have fun, and learn something every time you go out there. If you want to become a better angler, every time you go out and hit the water, try to learn one thing while you're out there. And, you know, before you know it, you're going to have all sorts of your own knowledge and your own tips stockpiled in your brain to hopefully someday catch, you know, your fish of a lifetime, maybe even a record fish, who knows. But thank you for listening to this week's installment of Tackle Talk Tuesdays. My name is Dominic Fish on Turcotte, otherwise known as Fishing with Dom. I hope you have a fantastic week ahead of you, and stay put. Happy hook sets. Take it easy. Goodbye, folks.